now. For those of you who are guests this morning, I'm really sorry. You're coming in right at the end of a fairly long series in which, as a church, we've been looking at the Ark of the Covenant. We've been looking, at the Tabernacle of God, which is this great tent in which God dwelt amongst his people in the desert as they were walking through that to the promised land, and actually which he used for quite a number of years after that as they settled inside the land. And what we've been doing is we've been looking at this fantastic tent or portable temple that God got his people to build, and seeing how within its structure and within the furniture and everything about it, really, in almost every detail, there are little pointers towards and little pictures of Jesus Christ and the work that he is going to do for us in saving us from our sin by dying on a cross. Well, as I say, we come to the very end of this series today. So for those of you who were here last week, you will know that we got to the Holy of Holies, hadn't we, which is the first room, essentially, within the tent of the tabernacle. And we got as far as the curtain that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which is the most sacred place beyond. We hadn't yet entered into the Holy of Holies, the most sacred place. We spent a whole week last week just looking at the curtain. For those of you who weren't here, you'll think, my goodness. Maybe those of you who were here think, my goodness. But I hope there was some richness in that imagery for you and how it points to us of Jesus. Well, today, we looked at last week how that curtain, when it was in the later temple, just at the moment upon which Jesus died upon the cross, as he breathed his last, there was a mighty earthquake, and that curtain, which itself was something up to like 9 inches thick, if you can imagine, like a phone book or something like that, that was torn in two as a sign that, well, the space between where we can dwell and where God dwells has been opened up to us, that we can now enter into the presence of God. So this week, we enter into the Holy of Holies itself, because God has allowed such things through the breaking of that curtain. We enter into the Holies of Holies itself, but what are we going to find there? And the answer is, not much. Not much. The Holy of Holies was a big square space, pretty much like the space that we're in now. In fact, I've been told that this room is based on the dimensions of the Holy of Holies not in the tabernacle, but in the later temple that was built. So it's a big square space like the space we're in, but the difference being that you can all see each other in this space, whereas in the Holy of Holies, the curtain 9 inches thick, that wasn't letting any light in. There were no windows, there was no lamps in that place. It was completely dark. So you're entering into the Holy of Holies, into this completely dark space. And the only other thing in this space that you will find is on the back wall, you have the thing that we've just had described to us, which is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, which some of you may know from Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's the thing that Indiana Jones chases all over the world in order to save. I think, is that the one where he saves it from the Nazis or something like that? It's very strange. But anyway, so you might know it from that, or if you read your Bible, you might know it. Anyway, it's this sacred object, and it is the most sacred object. It is the place where the Spirit of God is said to come and to dwell. But what is it? What is it? I mean, you've seen the video. I hope the video helped you to know kind of what it is. But I'm just going to go through some of the details with you now, so that you can perhaps appreciate what it was that was being said to you. So it's a box. It's a box made of, what did he say? Acacia wood. You were listening. Hurrah. For those of you who don't know, acacia is actually a thorn tree. You don't get many thorn trees, do you? You get thorn bushes maybe, or brambles or something, but this is a thorn tree. And it's interesting, in the Bible, thorns just represent the curse that has come onto humankind because of their sinfulness. It's like if you sin, then you get snagged in briars and thorns. It's quite a helpful image, actually. That's kind of what getting caught out in your own sin is like, isn't it? It's like when you tell a lie, and then you've got to tell a lie to cover up the lie, and the lie and then it just escalates. You find yourself completely trapped by the situation. That's this sort of thorny thing. That's what thorns do. They trap you. Anyway, it's made out of a thorn bush. It represents the curse through sin. Yeah? And it's interesting that Jesus, when he's crucified, what does he have on his head? A crown of thorns. Yeah, it's like he's literally sort of carrying our sin at that point. He's bearing the weight of our sin upon his own head. Yeah? And one of the contenders, actually, they don't know exactly, but it's very likely that it was actually acacia wood. It was the acacia tree that they used to make the crown of thorns, because it has particularly long and nasty thorns, and it's a particularly hard and, spiky tree. So they think that they might have made the crown of thorns on this. So maybe there's already something pointing towards Jesus. Certainly it points towards the curse, and then it's surrounded by gold. So we talked about gold representing like eternity or divinity, because, the divine is eternal. So what you have is, the curse of mankind contained within surrounded by this heavenly, eternal material. Did you see a little picture of Jesus already in this? Yeah, it gets better. We ain't got anywhere yet. Okay, because in the box is this thing that in Exodus keeps getting referred to as the testimony that you should put in it. Now, when you testify to something, it says these are the things that point towards something else. That's what testimony means. I bear testimony for this other thing. But what is the testimony that's in there? Well, there were three objects, or sets of things that were put inside the Ark of the Covenant. And each of them, I think, in different ways, point towards Jesus. The first thing that was in there was the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, the law of Israel. So to Israel, they would have thought that this was testifying to the fact that God has drawn them together as a community under the single law of God. And that was right and true. The problem was, of course, that Israel was never, ever able to keep that law. Famously, when Moses receives it for the first time, he takes these 2 stone tablets down the mountain, and he finds that the people have already started worshipping other gods. And he gets so angry, he smashes them. Okay, and he has to go back up and get new copies, which are the ones that go into the Ark of the Covenant. There's only one person who has ever fully fulfilled the law. Who is that? Jesus. Yeah, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, do not think that I've come to abolish the law. It should be the law, or the prophets, but to fulfill them. He fulfills them in several ways. He fulfills them firstly by doing them, being the one sinless person who ever lived, who actually follows each and every one flawlessly. He does that for sure. But he does so much more than that, because what he does in the Sermon on the Mount, what you're reading, is him giving not just the proper understanding. Well, he fulfills them not just in their sort of their practical detail, but in their spirit. In the Sermon on the Mount, what he gives you is not just the letter of the law, but he gives you the spirit of the law in order that you too might be able to follow these things more perfectly. Though, of course, you don't follow them that perfectly, which is why he fulfills them in this final sense of what does he do on the cross for us? He says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Isn't that generous? I think they probably sort of knew what they were doing, but they didn't know exactly what they were doing. And it's like with us in sin, isn't it? We do bad things, but we don't understand the half of the damage that we're doing as we're doing it. But Jesus, in forgiving us from the cross, he fulfills it for us, as well as having fulfilled it himself. Do you see? Okay, so we've got the two pieces of the law that are in there. The second testimony that's hidden within this box is a little cup, and within this little cup they have put some of the manna that the Israelites received in the desert. Now, for the Israelites, that was a sign of God's provision to them. But it's interesting, when you read the story, it's like they get this provision because they're not very good, really. They don't go 5 minutes in the desert, really, before they start grumbling that God, he's taken them out of this wonderful place where they were. They loved being in slavery, apparently. They'd rather be there than in the desert anyway. And God says, no, here you are, here, have some manna. It's just going to be this heavenly food that comes to you. But no sooner as they've received the manna than they're still not satisfied. They're grumbling again. He has to give them some quail. And it goes on and on like this. And it's constantly God is having to say to them. He gets quite angry with them in the end. It's like, no, I'm providing you with more than just food for your bellies. I'm giving you like sustenance for your soul as well. Well, interestingly, when Jesus comes on the scene, he feeds the, how many? 5,000? Do we remember this story? Yeah. And then a little while later, the crowds follow him, and he has a set two with them. And it's the same set two that God has with the Israelites, because all they're interested in him is him giving them more and more and more bread for their stomachs. And he says to them, no, don't you understand? That's just a sign looking forward to something so much greater. I am here to fill the spiritual hole that exists within you, this desire for meaning and purpose and everything else in life. I'm here to do that. He says to them, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. I mean, we're going to be eating bread representing his flesh later in communion. But do you see this manna that's in the Ark of the Testimony? It's testifying to Jesus, who is the living bread. Wonderful. The final object that's in there, you can just about make it out here. It's here. It's the rod of Aaron, which budded. That's kind of an obscure reference, so I'll explain it to you. Again, so in Israel, the very, very first great high priest that the ancient Israelites had in the desert was this man called Aaron, who was Moses' brother. And I think the people smelled a rat with that. They were like, what? So Moses is like the prime minister, and Aaron is going to be the second in command. I mean, come on, is this not a bit of a family thing going on here, Moses? And they start to doubt that Aaron really has the priestly divine authority that he's supposed to have. So all the tribes come and they make their complaint. And God says, what we're going to do is we're going to have a test so that you might know exactly where my authority lies, who has the true divine authority. He says, all the leaders of the clans, you bring forward your staff, or anyone that thinks they're good enough for the job, basically. You bring forward your staff. You have to understand for the Israelites, like a staff wasn't like a walking stick that we have in perhaps old age or if you've got a bad back or something. For them, every man had a staff, and a staff was just the sign of a person's authority. In perhaps the same way as a briefcase is the sign of a businessman's authority in London, if they work in London. Or you know how in the olden days every businessman had an umbrella, whether it was raining or not? It was kind of like a sign of who they were as much as it was. So a staff for them was a bit like that, okay? It represented that they had authority in their family, something like that. So God says, bring a staff if you think you've got authority and lay it out in front of the meeting place. And then leave it, and tomorrow morning come back. And whichever staff has come back to life, has risen from the dead, has budded, that staff, the person who owns that staff will be the one that has authority, the one who has my divine presence with them. Well, whose staff buds? Aaron's staff. And so it is that he truly was the great high priest. But what are we celebrating this morning, guys? Jesus. And what did he do? He dies and he comes back to life. He is the dead stick, so to speak, that resurrects, that buds and blossoms again. Yeah? And by which act we know that he truly has divine authority, that he really is the Son of God whom he said he was. Until the moment that Jesus raises from the tomb, he could be any guy. He says he's the Son of God, but is he? They put him to death. That seems to suggest, he was a fraudster. But when he raises from the dead, we know with a certainty that no. This isn't just some, ruse that some guy has come up with. He really has the authority that he says he has, not because he says he has it, but because God is giving it to him by raising him from the dead, just as, in a sense, God rose Aaron's staff from the dead. Aaron's staff symbolizes the resurrection of Jesus. Isn't that wonderful? These three things in there. Interestingly, the staff, it's made of almond wood, and it doesn't just bud, it flowers and produces almonds. It's like, God's like, I'm really going to show you guys, no doubt here. But we looked back a few weeks ago that almond, the word almond in Hebrew, means to wait and to watch. Yeah, and the reason it was called that was because the almond tree was the first tree in the spring to blossom. So it was like the first tree to come back to life out of the darkness of winter. Okay, isn't that a picture of Jesus? Isn't he just the first one to be raised? In anticipation of all of us who have put our faith in him, who shall be raised on the final day? Yeah? Yeah. And who is it that we wait and we watch for in anticipation for the dawning of the new life which is to come? Jesus. Awesome, isn't it? I love it. God put that in a box. So, there you have it. But it gets better. I mean, we're just beginning, really. We haven't even got to the mercy seat yet. The mercy seat. It's beautifully named. So this is the lid, essentially, that goes on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And on it, as was described by the man in the video, you've got these two cherubim, haven't you? Which sit on either end. And they look down at this empty space. Apart from it wasn't empty. Because when the presence of God rested on the tabernacle, okay, it came down into the Holy of Holies, and then it rested upon the lid of the mercy seat, basically. And to the ancient Israelites, the way they would have understood this is that the mercy seat was basically, it was the throne of God. Okay, he sat upon it. Okay, as he sat at the center of their community, yeah, and was God to them. Okay. So that's what the mercy seat kind of represents. But it's interesting to note that it wasn't a unique object in ancient Mesopotamian kind of culture. There were other tribes, other peoples that had objects quite similar to this, shrines that looked quite like this. But for them, the space that was in the center was never to be left empty. What do you think they put in the center space between two cherubim on a sort of a mercy seat type thing? They put an idol of their God. They put an idol of their God. But the Israelites were told very specifically, do not put anything in the space between the cherubim, partly because, God is going to come down and rest in there. He is their true God, not just a little picture of him. But you can't picture God, so he will just be there himself, right? Partly that. The only thing that they were allowed to put there was what? Well, we looked at it last week when we looked at the Day of Atonement. It was the blood of the atonement sacrifice, which was to be sprinkled there. Yeah? And we looked last week at how that blood represents the blood of Jesus, sprinkled on the throne of God. And already I'm just starting to see a little picture of the Lamb that was slain for the forgiveness of the world, the Lamb who was slain, who sits upon the throne of God, as we read about in the book of Revelation. Yeah? Do you see it? It gets better. It gets better. Because what if I was to tell you that this Ark of the Covenant, this box, wasn't just a shrine like you might find in the other nations of the world. They had similar shrines to this for sure, but the form that this takes is even more particular to that. It's actually a funeral shrine. Yeah? Okay? It's a kind that they found actually in the tomb of Tutankhamun as a funeral shrine for, King Tut, who was, for them, for the Egyptians at least, considered to be a god, right? And actually, if you just look at this, you just look at the form of it, what does it kind of look like? A coffin, doesn't it? Because what other box do we put on poles and carry on our shoulders that's kind of twice as long as it is wide? It looks very much like a coffin, doesn't it? But whether you think of it as a coffin or not, it certainly is a sort of a funeral shrine for a god, yeah? But a funeral shrine for a god in which the box has been filled with objects which point forward to the person of Jesus, as we've already looked at, but on which the space in which you're supposed to put the image of the God is left empty. Right then, we're going to do something really awesome now. At least I think it's awesome. And I hope this is going to be one of those things that you haven't seen it before, but when you see it, you cannot not see it ever again, and it will just change the whole way you look at it, because that's how it was for me when I saw this, and so I'm excited. All right, you ready? You ready? Think back to what Jean read for us from the book of John, when Mary goes to the tomb, and as the other disciples run off to go and discuss what they're going to do next, Mary looks into the tomb, and what does she see? She sees the empty place where Jesus' body should have been, yes, and at the head and the foot of essentially what was a coffin space, yeah, there were two angels. It's a picture that looks something a little bit like that, doesn't it? I mean, I hate that picture. It's a bit twee and nasty, but nevertheless, that's kind of what's being drawn here. But isn't that a picture of the Ark of the Covenant? Doesn't that just look the same? Yeah? Or maybe we should just think of it the other way, right? Maybe we should think of it as like the Ark of the Covenant is actually, when you look at it now, it's now a picture of two angels sat, one at the head, one at the foot, of the empty space where Jesus' body, the place, where the idol should be. Jesus' body was lain, but is lain no longer. The only thing that they are looking down upon is what? Well, the blood of the sacrifice that has been sprinkled, just as Jesus' blood was surely sprinkled on the place where he'd been lain from the wounds that were in his hands and in his feet. It's a picture of what Mary saw. And when you see that, then the Holy of Holies, this dark space into which you go, empty, but completely dark, it becomes just a picture of the empty tomb, doesn't it, on Easter morning? I think so. And then the curtain, it seems to me it's like that's just a stand-in for the stone, right? The curtain that was split in two is a stand-in for the stone that is rolled away also by an earthquake. And interestingly, I mean, outside the tomb before the morning, like there weren't cherubim guarding the entrance, were there? But there were Roman soldiers, right? And so then the holy place where you have, the lamps, the altar of incense, the lampstand, and the bread of the presence, which we've looked at already, represents something like Jesus being the way, the truth, and the life. That's just like the garden, the place where Mary meets with Jesus, the risen Lord, who is the way, the truth, and the life. And then the outer court is like a representation of just the rest of the Easter week, like where Jesus cleanses the temple and then washes his disciples' feet, which is represented to us by the bronze laver of cleansing, yeah? And the sacrifice that he makes upon the cross for the sin of the world, which is revealed to us by the bronze altar and all the sacrifices of the spotless, clean animals that were made there. Isn't that just awesome? Well, I think it is. It's like about 1,500 years before God was going to do it, he wanted us to know with an absolute certainty what it was that he was going to do. That we already had his people, the Israelites, already had in mind a picture of what it was that he was about to do, that they knew precisely what it was that they were supposed to be focusing their attention upon. Yeah? Because the Holy of Holies, the most holy, sacred place in all of Israel, was a place that was a picture in advance of the empty tomb Jesus. And we talk about giving us a sign. Jesus is telling us something, isn't he? I think he's saying, look, guys, look, know, understand, have no doubt. Death is beaten. It has been conquered by the death and the resurrection of my beloved Son. And so, therefore, each and every one of us can have not just faith which is a hopeful, wishful thinking, but a sure and certain faith that we too, through faith in Jesus, can enter into the presence of the Lord, that we can meet him in the garden, so to speak, as Mary does, that we can receive the gift of salvation unto eternal life.